Howdy y'all, Joe Hills here, recording as I always do in Nashville, Tennessee, and in today's episode I have my finger on the pulse of America's democracy and I'm calling desperately for a mirror. Fortunately, long-time fan of HermitCraft, Allison Chapman, who is a national LGBTQ+ legislative researcher and also a trans rights activist, is calling in to talk to me about the current situation and how folks can chip in and participate in doing the hard work that's left to be done in their own way. Howdy, Allison.
Howdy, Joe. Thanks for having me. Long-time listener, first-time caller. I think that's what people say.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing being here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm so glad to have this opportunity to kind of talk about what opportunities there are for other people. Because I know I was definitely feeling like, boy, I should be doing more right now. But I don't know where to start. I don't know how my skills can really make a difference right now. And I realized I know people, and sometimes they don't have the same connections I do. If I can get the word out about what's going on or what might be happening, that's a small way for me to help. And so I wanted to, spotlight your work a little bit. Now, you are a legislative researcher and you run a legislation tracker. Can you talk a little bit about what a legislation tracker is? What's the elevator pitch for somebody who's never seen something like that?
It's basically a Google Sheet. No, it's a little more advanced than that. But we basically run a Google Sheet. Me and our team has grown. It started with me and two other people. Now we've grown into a team of about 10 plus people who work on this. Basically, we take time out of our day every day to look through all of the proposed bills, the proposed laws in the United States, and find ones that affect queer people, both positively and negatively, right? I have more of a focus on the negative ones. I find them more interesting. But we track both, and this is my third legislative session of doing that. So basically, it's a Google Sheet, and we find bill numbers as they have some number attached to them. We type in, oh, it's in this state, it's this bill. We then categorize it. We have a bunch of different categories, so we can say, this bill bans trans people from sports. This bill says that discrimination in this way is okay. And so we categorize all of that and basically create this spreadsheet that then this is where you're talking about skills fitting into movements and stuff, right? And I am a software engineer by trade, right?
Sure.
So I used a service called LegiScan. I definitely did not get inspired by that name whatsoever. And I decided I was going to hook into that API, and all of the other information about those bills, who sponsored it, what's the current status, the history of it, the name of the bill, all of that information automatically gets populated in that. And the reasoning why it became automated was because I started tracking them, and this would have been going into 2023, and we were tracking about 50 bills, and I was like, hold on, y'all, this is not going to work out. I cannot click links for 50 bills and update the status manually. And so being a programmer, I automated my way out of that. So that's kind of what the legislation tracker is basically that. And then we also have a bot that was on Twitter. Technically, it's still on Twitter. I need to just yeet it because Elon Musk. But we're on Blue Sky as well, so it's at LegiAlerts.org. And anytime a bill gets updated or we add a bill, it sends out a notification on that. So you can see the fire hose of information that we deal with on a daily basis.
So there's bills being passed or argued about, at least, in 50 states in the union, plus the federal government, and you're tracking all of those. So It makes sense that you would need to use some degree of automation wherever possible to streamline stuff. This tool you've created isn't just going out into a void. you're meeting people and speaking with news organizations and stuff that are using this tool.
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about who's using it and how it's like affecting, the way that people respond to legislation like this?
Yeah, no, it's really become a trusted source among journalists and organizations. It gets surreal. I know you mentioned that when you were mentioning I was going to be on here, people knew of the tracker, right? It's wild to me, right? Because it's set up to help the community and help organizations and stuff, but also because I find it interesting and I want to keep an eye on what's going on. And so we've had like a really great response. And when we launched it originally, the wave of anti-LGBTQ bills in that first year I was doing this, was nothing like we saw before, nor was anybody expecting in a lot of ways. So at the time, it happened so quickly and so early. Large organizations like the ACLU and others hadn't had time to set theirs up yet and ended up being behind us for a little while. Well, they caught up just because of how quick we got going. And that's kind of the plus side of we're not actually a formal organization of any ways. We're just a group of people who do this. And we have attorneys that work with us. We have other activists that work with us, journalists that works with us, people who, do this kind of work. Originally too, there's a lot of people who duplicated work. So when we find people duplicating work or using our work, or that's how a lot of people have gotten pulled into this, right? Is that people just started, specifically one of the people who works on this a lot with me now, started by just emailing me every time I had a typo or an issue with it. And after about 10 emails, you get tired of manually fixing it. And so you finally are like, here, just have access. Can you just fix it for me?
Yeah.
And that's how we've gotten people involved.
Well, I know when I've heard folks from like the civil rights movement here in Nashville speak, one thing they've talked about is the importance of acknowledging that not every organization is going to be a perfect fit for everyone. No one organization should try to perfectly encapsulate all of the positive ideals that are important to everyone, because you're going to fail. There's going to be people that care about different things. But if you can create smaller groups that do have shared ideology and then bridge those groups, basically having different community organizations work in concert rather than trying to fight for the same attention and the same people's time, then you end up with a much better result. It's about coalition building on the whole. And so what you're describing is that you guys weren't trying to become a new organization. You're just trying to do your own thing in a way that works in concert with other groups.
Absolutely. And over time, as things have gotten more dire and stuff, I have definitely connected with people at all these organizations. I have really good friends at all these organizations. There is times where behind closed doors, occasionally I have words about these organizations. I disagree with the way they're doing things, right? But I think that's part of movement building, is being able to say that, but also, recognize the strengths and what everyone brings to the table and treat everyone with dignity and respect. And that's gotten me really far, and has gotten our movement really far, less far. And it's something that we see continuing to grow and even strengthen as over the past few weeks, 2 or 3 months since the election, our work together has just become ever so more important.
One thing that you mentioned was that there are both good bills and bad bills that are tracked in your tracker. One thing that I saw was you have a heat map of those, and you can see on that heat map 48 bad bills or so in Texas. But also, when you look at the heat map for good bills, there's 25 good bills in Texas. it seems to be the only state that's just like maximum efforting everything.
You're not wrong.
Do you have any insight into what's happening there?
Unfortunately, queer rights has been this way for quite a long time, and trans rights too, where it's this very polarizing, politicized issue, when it shouldn't be, and all of that. But because of that, this is when we see that almost virtue signaling from politicians, where in Texas, one of those good bills is probably never going to be passed right now, right? They have a Republican trifecta. It's probably not happening. But what that signals to people is that there is still Democrats there. There's still politicians there who do care and who do support trans community. And I find that really important. And it's something that I encourage legislators to do. Even if you're in a state that is hostile, you should be putting out these bills. You should be advocating for this. Again, just to signal that, through all of the hate and things, that there's still people out there who care, and it's really important for people to see that.
Well, I think it's interesting, the idea that, like, there's a certain level of resignation to futility. That people, when they're worn down in an unfair system, they start saying, why even bother pushing back if we're just going to get, crushed again and again and again. When I look at the lunchroom sit-ins in Nashville, and they knew, okay, if we go in here and we sit down at this lunch counter, we're going to get arrested. But that's fine. We're going to have another full restaurant worth of people waiting around the corner. As soon as the cops leave, they're going to walk in. They're going to sit at that lunch counter, and they're going to get arrested. No matter how many times we sit here today, no matter how many of us they haul off, no matter how many of us get arrested, we're not going to be able to have lunch here today. But maybe tomorrow, maybe a month from now, like, going through the effort of standing up for yourself and demonstrating that it's important to others that you be treated with respect over and over again, not conceding that, I think is a vital exercise that, you got to go into it with the realistic expectation of, I'm going to get arrested today and whatever.
Absolutely.
But, like, maybe next year I can sit down here and I can order a sandwich and actually eat one, I think showing up is important. So, I understand that, it sucks that these bills are almost certainly not going to pass, but, like, at least these politicians are trying something. And
exactly,
I think it's important for us as individuals, though, to look at that and also go, okay, well, it's good that they're trying something, but it's probably not going to work. So I probably should try something that's not going to work too. If I have something that I know is going to work, do that first. But realistically, trying something is better than trying nothing, because at least you're going to learn something, hopefully.
Oh, that is so important. And Joe, now that you mentioned that, I will jump in with, that was my mentality when I went to Washington, D.C. and spoke at the press conference at the Senate, right? With the senator. Like, going into that, I knew absolutely we were not winning that battle, right? Like, that was clear. But I still spent the time and money and resources to go down and to advocate against it and watch it and talk about it, because like selfishly is like, I'm still getting used to tracking congressional things. I'm used to tracking states, but it works very differently. I wanted to be around that space. I wanted to be around the people who track that and to understand and learn. Like, I would rather mess up when it is it was bad what happened, right? In case you missed it, Biden managed to sign the first anti-LGBTQ bill federally since the 1996. So since I was born. And it really sucked. But what that means is I learned things, and that is important. And being able to do it on something that and this is where I'm going to sound a little bit more cold and calculated, but like doing it on an issue where it affected a much smaller amount of people is really good for me to be able to learn from my mistakes and learn from what happened in order to make sure I don't make those mistakes when it affects even more people, right? And nobody ever should feel like they're undefended or no one cares, right? And so even if you're going in and you know you're going to lose, you still stand up and fight anyways, especially when it's for, like, in our case, it was for transgender kids of military families. And, you know, they need to be able to see that there's people out here who care and aren't just going away quietly or giving up and saying, well, we weren't going to win that anyways because it had bipartisan support. That's not an option. You know, you have to stand up and show that you care.
It can be really frustrating when you exist in a two-party system and both parties aren't really expressing any interest in ensuring that you're taken care of. It's a real challenge for people who look at politics to feel like they have, well, what am I going to do if, you know, the Democratic Party isn't going to do anything? Well, you know what? Here's the thing is there's a lot of things that politicians aren't getting done that they haven't gotten done in the first place. You know, once again, I know I'm going to keep talking about the civil rights movement a lot because, you know, that was an area of study for me in college, and I live in Nashville, and I've had the fantastic opportunity to see many civil rights leaders speak live. These folks, they weren't waiting for the politicians to solve their problems. They were saying, we're going to find ways to create societal pressure where the politicians have no choice but to address our problems. We can't allow this system to grind us underfoot forever. We have to find ways to make sure that we are taking care of each other and that we are working toward a better future. And so, you know, on your website, Allison, you have the words trans rights activist. Can you talk a little bit about what being an activist means to you and how you got started in activism?
Yeah, I love this question, Joe. I chose the word activist because that's what felt right in a lot of ways. And like that sounds a little bit weird.
Well, it's the opposite of a sedentary person. It's the opposite of not doing anything. You have chosen to engage in activity.
And in a lot of ways, it's an activity that can lead, for me, to physical harm in some ways. And, you know, it's not very fun receiving death threats. Most of the time, they're not very serious either. But, you know, it happens on occasion. Yeah. And so there's that. And I feel very, like, passionate of I'm not going to back down. And I don't know, it felt right to me. At other times I use advocate because I find that using that has a more, you know, it's kind of two different tones to describe what I'm doing, right? Or you could even say three. I have researcher, which is more the academic side, and like, oh yeah, I understand these bills. I've worked with attorneys for 2+ years, studied under them, right? And then there is times where, you know, that title works really well. Then there's times where advocate works well. Maybe when I'm speaking in front of the Senate or I'm speaking to a senator or something like that, I might use an advocate. You say that I'm an advocate, right? Because that makes, unfortunately, sometimes talking to people and getting those conversations started requires you not to be immediately dismissed. And then there's other times where activist is important because I want people to know that I'm not just going to go and talk about something, right? There's action to that. I am going to talk about it a lot. But I'll also do things about it as well.
Obviously, one form of activism is your research. But do you attend other marches or rallies or pride events or anything that you'd like to talk about as opportunities for others to find ways to hook in to the community and to contributing?
my more recent things that I've done outside of the computer, right,
Mm-hmm.
is
I've heard of
is
outside of the computer. I want to
outside.
go there
You've heard of it
someday.
before? It's kind of a wild place. I don't know if you've ever been,
Yeah.
but it is a pretty wild place. I don't go very often.
Uh-huh.
No, I marshaled with the ACLU for the Supreme Court case U.S. versus Kermeti, which is a case out of Tennessee
Mm-hmm.
that is going to decide whether Tennessee's law banning gender affirming care for minors, anybody under the age of 18, is constitutional or not. And trans issues being so divisive, right? Or pure existence being so divisive, required a large amount of security slash marshals, and that's what I was doing. So if anybody was there, I was the person running around in a black jacket with a black backpack with a trans pride flag on it. And I had a vest on and a name tag that said Marshall,
Mm-hmm.
and I was running around like crazy. I since then I have seen like so many people that were there that I just completely missed because I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't actually in the event. I was on the outskirts of the event, making sure no one got hurt, that
Mm-hmm.
medical attention was given if needed,
Well, you were an
that,
EMT, right?
I was an EMT. I'm no longer a licensed EMT, but yes,
Okay.
I was an EMT.
I think that's a great opportunity to help contribute.
And I'm paranoid, so it's great. I mean, I can sit there and my head can be on a swivel, and my one and only job is to make sure everyone is safe.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that amazing, and everyone went home safe. I was so happy. Like, to be honest, I was not I was prepared for worst case scenarios because I believe the threat was high enough that we could see some terrible things happen, and
Mm-hmm.
nothing did. And it was a wonderful feeling to go back to my hotel room afterwards and being like, oh my God, everyone made it home safe. No one got arrested. No one
Mm-hmm.
got assaulted. Like, wow, everyone went home safe. And, there is a time and a place for civil disobedience and putting your safety on the line, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in a situation like that, that wasn't the situation. That wasn't what people needed to be doing. And honestly, there was way too many people for something like that.
Let's talk about, as somebody who ends up intersecting with a lot of different groups, probably between your research and your other experiences, what opportunities do you see for younger people? Maybe, people that are starting out in college, aren't necessarily financially established yet, but are looking to find ways to connect
Sure.
in the LGBTQ community, and not just like to meet people, but also to find ways to contribute in the current political climate to kind of making the world better in some small way.
I mean, the biggest and most important thing that anybody can do, if able, is to find community, especially in person. Right now, and part of the reason for that is because of the current political climate we are in. Joe, there's limited things that I can say on this stream safely, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily because we're trying to keep things family friendly and stuff like that, but because there's legitimately things that could endanger people if I talk about them here. And so those have to stay more in person, offline, in secure chats and stuff like that. And so getting plugged in, I think is incredibly important, and having that community support. One thing that you see said a lot in leftist circles and stuff like that is the phrase "we protect us." And normally when I hear people say that, I think of like a protest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or an encampment or something like that. And I've taken that statement and really like it's become really personal to me, as in a way of we protect us means so much more than, we'll link arms if the police come towards us to arrest us at a protest, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's way more than that. It means that when someone's having a mental breakdown because something happened in their life, making sure we're there to support them and talk to them and help them in any way we can. If someone's having a hard time making ends meet, making sure we help them financially if we can, make them food when they're sick, stuff like that. Like the simplest of things can be applied to that statement. And I think it's really powerful to kind of take out of your mind that this means you have to put like yourself at risk, or you have to spend money, as much of as like you just be with people and contribute the ways you can with them, and we will all protect each other. If it's no matter what it is, we will protect each other, right?
In a fair and just society where everything is going well, it's not a big deal to help out somebody who might need a little extra help here and there. But in a society that is systematically trying to dehumanize people, going out of your way to be compassionate and caring can be a life-giving act. It can be something
Absolutely.
that is a radical choice that, you know, the little things matter more, the worse things are. And so it's kind of one of those situations where people might say, well, when things are this bad, I feel like nothing I could do matters. But, well, actually, if things were great, it really wouldn't matter as much if you helped. But now is the best time for you to do literally the smallest thing. Anything you could do to help somebody in need is...
Joe, today I got a message from someone who was like, hey, I was looking at your GitHub repos and you accidentally leaked your password to your Blue Sky account.
Oh, no.
And I went, oh, my God, that's embarrassing. I have a degree in cybersecurity, and I confirmed that indeed it had been leaked. Like, I'm talking about the simplest things of being a good human to your fellow humans, right? Means the world. Like being like, oh my God, thank you so much. Like, and now we're working together. Like, you know, he was having problems working on some code, and I'm like, here, yeah, let's debug this together. I'll give you a hand. Let's figure out what we can figure out with it. It's the littlest of things. Like sometimes it's sharing a GoFundMe on social media. Sometimes it can look so many different ways. And I appreciate that person reaching out to me being like, here's your password. I don't think you meant to leak that. It's like, oh, thank you. That's been out in the world for way too long. And having each other's backs. Like, I don't know. I'm kind of reiterating on myself, but I think, you know, if we want to really abstract look at it, and, you know, it's breaking down the capitalism that we're all taught, and kind of breaking that down a little bit and thinking about it in a little bit of a different way, and thinking about the world in a little bit of a different way, of being here to really just try to make a difference and to help people.
So basically, it sounds like connecting to your local community is one of the best ways to find out what members of your local community need. And that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, talking too much online about any sort of political intention or movement is creates an operational security issue. So, you know,
use Signal, folks. Please use Signal. Don't use Discord. Use Signal and I'm not even talking about like serious things, but like in relationships, talking to your friends, use Signal. Set up auto deleting messages. I know it's a pain when you want to search things, but I highly, highly, highly recommend you do that, especially in the world we're in right now.
Signal is not a sponsor. Just as a side note, not a sponsor. Good communications practices can help keep the people safe around you. That's actually a point. You have a bachelor's degree in cybersecurity, correct?
Yeah, digital forensics and cybersecurity. So I was trained to go after criminals in the cyber world and analyze devices. It's a fascinating degree, and that's kind of where I kind of credit some of my interest into the legal side of things. I had to take a criminal law class, and I found it fascinating. And so it's no surprise that like a year later, I find myself reading legislation. So that is as far as formal training and legislation goes. I took a undergrad criminal law class, but most of it's all mentorships by attorneys and stuff like that.
I think one of the great things about a background in programming is it teaches you that you can learn systems. because programming languages are changing at an increasingly frustrating rate for the most part. And so just to stay in the same place, you're Alice in Wonderland in the whole thing. You're constantly learning new things about the existing languages you know. So then at that point, you might as well learn more languages, and you might as well read this, and you might as well read that. And at a certain point, you're just like, wait, I can just read, like, preliminary injunctions judges wrote because I'm reading everything else. I guess I can figure this out too. You know, it's
logic. Like,
it is
coding in that it's if legislation is if statements. Like, and genuinely in a lot of ways, you have to learn legalese, right? Kind of like a programming language. You have to learn like what these little specific things mean. And then there's times too that like just like in programming, you're like, I read this, I kind of get a feeling what it does, but I don't really understand it. So I'm going to go ask someone who does. I do the same thing with the legislation where I'm like, got a bad feeling about this. I don't quite understand it. I'm going to pass this off to an attorney and ask, hey, what are your thoughts on this? And then learn from that for next time I see something similar. Because a lot of legislation is actually almost identical, which is fascinating. But yeah, it's like coding in a lot of ways.
So I saw that you have a GitHub repo for LegiAlerts. So anybody can go in and check out the code for your script and your hosting of the site?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to get involved, I'm sure I could find things for you to do.
Yeah. So there's another way people can help.
There's another way to get involved, right? I will say for when I started getting involved in open source development, I helped build a bot for a Discord server. And I was like, yeah, I can do that. Like, they're like, okay, can you do this portion of the bot? I'm like, yeah. We're coding in Python? Yeah, sure, I could do that. And then I'm over here being like, well, I guess I'm learning how to program in Python now.
I hope you like tuples.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, there's a bit of, honestly, faking it till you make it. Like,
when programming especially, because it's such a fast-moving field.
Yeah, like you don't actually, this was fascinating to me. You know, I went professionally after being an EMT. I ran a Minecraft hosting company for several years.
I
sold. Yeah. And so I'm no longer involved with the company really much, but so I worked in the Minecraft industry for a while, and I ran a hosting company, and it was fascinating going from that to a big cloud computing company. And I quickly realized that everyone's held together by duct tape, and no one actually knows what they're doing. And it was such an amazing feeling of being like, oh, what we weren't doing, like that I just came up with, was not a dumb idea. Like most people were like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. And yeah, there's a lot of faking it till you make it. And I think also I say that I'm a national LGBTQ researcher because it is what I do, and I am, but I wasn't awarded that title by anybody. Like all these things that I call myself are to get me in the door to talk to people. And they're not necessarily an award you're just given one day, right? No one awards you, congratulations, you are now an activist.
No one says now you're a writer, now you're a painter. You know,
nobody says that.
You know, like
you just do it.
No,
and so,
that's great.
Yeah, that's my biggest recommendation. You find something that's interesting and that you think you can contribute, run with it. Like, do it. Like, there is so much of just if you have the self-confidence to be in the room, everyone is going to treat you like you should be in the room because everyone also is in the same position as you. Yeah.
I mean, I will say, like, there is a certain amount of, if you don't feel like you deserve to be in the room, ask yourself, is there anything you could do to improve your credibility? You know, like, for example, I saw that you guys self-host basically via a DigitalOcean droplet for LegiAlerts. You know, so that's one of those things where, you know, if you want to learn about hosting, you don't have to necessarily go to some formal class. You can go sign up with a web host, get a Linux server, even if it's a virtualized one, and just start messing around. You
So
can,
much fun.
yeah, you can learn this stuff. And I think it's actually going to be increasingly important for individuals to learn how to self-host their own work and their own sites.
Absolutely.
Like with this Twitter implosion, that's actually something, like, I don't necessarily want to get into the web hosting business, but
Of
I
course.
do want to encourage people who are creative and artistic in my community to learn how to make their own websites, to learn how to host their own websites. And because I was a professional LAMP developer for years, I've been thinking that that's maybe the sort of thing that I should be spending more time on in the next year, is finding ways to help people kind of feel more confident in their own talents. Like, if you're already talented enough to make all this cool artwork, you could probably figure out how to make a basic website for yourself too. And you could probably figure out how to host it safely. Let's talk about that. And so people who have the experience of just handling stuff like that, publishing things and making things, you're going to be a valuable person to be in the room for any sort of serious discussion, because you understand problem solving and creativity, and hopefully also communication. Now, here's the big thing I will say is I am invited to be in a lot of rooms where I don't need to talk very much, if at all. That doesn't mean me being there isn't valuable. I need to speak up when it's my moment to speak up, but as somebody who monologues for a living, it's a real challenge sometime to know, okay, this is one where I'm just sitting back and I'm taking it in, and I'll wait to be called on, you know? So don't stress out too that, like, oh man, I don't have anything to say. I shouldn't go to this meetup. I shouldn't go to this. That's okay. You can go to something like that and just listen. I mean, I've been doing all sorts of things.
I would encourage you to go listen. There is issues with that other activists are working on. They're like, hey, I'm working on this, and I'm just like, can you just add me to the chat room that you all are talking about this in, so I can just absorb the information, because I'm unfamiliar with the subject and I want to learn more. And that is so important. Like, just listening or reading passively, or being in the room listening to people talk who has more experience than you can give you so much knowledge, and it will pay off eventually. Like, you'll have a moment being like, oh, this person recommended this in this other situation, now this applies to me in some way.
And another thing I want to point out is sometimes people feel intimidated because they're like, oh man, I'm surrounded by all these cool and knowledgeable people, and everybody I know is so much better at everything than me. How could I go to this community organizing event and contribute something? Honestly, you probably have ways to contribute you haven't thought of yet. But if you actually know that many cool and excellent people, and you're not just like being down on yourself, if you show up at that meeting and they're like, man, if only we knew somebody that had access to blank, or if only we knew somebody that had this talent, you could go, oh man, I can't do that, but I know a guy who can. Oh, I'll get these people in touch. Sometimes just connecting to other people to help them solve problems is a contribution, And so don't worry if you aren't sure what opportunities will present themselves or how you can necessarily apply your gifts. Just show up, be ready to learn, be ready to listen, and be open to opportunities that arise,
I agree with that so much so, and I would say that with my experience that that is how I have gotten myself where I am today. A lot of it is just being in those rooms and being there. And one of the examples was a week ago, or a week and a half ago now, or not a week and a half ago. Might have been less than a week ago. We realized with everything going on in the government, and executive orders, we could talk about executive orders. I could talk about executive orders for like 30 minutes, but
yeah,
executive orders don't just take effect immediately. They have to be enacted by policy from different parts of the government. But how that actually happens is a bajillion different government agencies on their different websites have to change a bunch of things. And we were like, oh my God, how do we figure this out? And someone was like, hey, I was like, hey, y'all, I don't have anything to do. Do you want, like, someone give me something to do? And they're like, can you figure out some way for us to get notifications whenever anything changes? And I'm like, yeah, I was thinking about it too. That'd be nice. Let me see what's out there. And I found some open source software and I self-deployed it and self-hosted it. I have servers in my basement, so it's sitting running on a server in my basement. And now we're tracking over 50 different government sites for changes.
Can I guess how you did it?
Huh?
Can I guess how you did it?
Yes, it is yes, go for it.
Okay, so if I was going to do this, I would use a cron job calling a wget command that would recursively pull a bunch of stuff from a list of federal government websites. And then and each time I did it, I would dump it into a new folder or something, and then I would run a diff of that folder's contents against the previous folder's contents.
I love that, Joe, but I cheated.
Oh no, how did you do it?
I found there's open source software out there called changedetection.io. They run their own platform, but it's open source software. And I just self-hosted that on my Unraid instance at home. And it is so cool. It has a little GUI, so I was able to give it to a bunch of attorneys and different organizations that I have acquaintances and friends at and be like, here, feel free to log in and use this. And yeah, we can, then I just hooked it into Discord and I get a Discord notification.
See, that is awesome. Like, your solution like, my thing would have worked, but it would have only worked for me because it's depending on the command line and things where, I could make something that publishes the results, but it wouldn't be as friendly for non-technical people to just jump in like that.
Exactly. And this was free and open source software, and I had it up and running in a day. Wow. And we've been adding to it. And since, we're tracking over 50 sites, and I've seen 10 of those sites go dark, as in those pages are now returning 404s. They have been deleted off the face of, the government's websites.
Now, is the tool you're using caching the sites, though, so that you can see this site went down, but here's what it was before?
It's not fully. So what I also did is I created an archive box instance as well, that I, on occasion, grab all the URLs that I'm running on there, throw it in an archive box, and run an archive on it. Or I simply go to Wayback Machine, because the good thing is Wayback Machine is getting it all right now. So I can compare it on Wayback Machine.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a real cool, just quick turnaround solution to a legitimate problem for researchers. So yeah, thank you for contributing in that way.
Yeah.
I am getting a lot of work done here at Hermit Holmdel. This interior was something that I've just been needing to set aside time to work on. But, it's always easier to work when you got somebody keeping you company. So thank you again to Allison for keeping me company while I get through all this. Speaking of trying to get through things though, it feels like for a lot of people right now, it's kind of a hopeless time. And viewer Austin Anderson writes, what gives you hope?
I have kind of two answers to that. The first one is that, what brings me hope very much is I find joy in the little things. Like, I am having a great time hanging out here, chatting, seeing the chat being so engaging. Those are the little things, right? I look at some of the insanity things that our government's doing, and I just laugh at it sometimes and just being like, this is so absurd. Like, yeah, it's really bad, but also it's absurd. I think one of the biggest moments I draw on of recently is when I was at the Supreme Court for U.S. versus Skermeti, I was talking about earlier, that towards the end of it, the opposition side had left. The transphobic side had left, but they still had their security there. They still had their music blasting. They had their whole space over on their side of things. It was kind of divided down the middle. And there was me and a group of about 3 or 4 other, no, it was more than that. About 8 of us went over and we just danced and sang and laughed along with their music on their side right in front of their security, right in front of all the people who had been, screaming terrible things at us, who despise us. And we're just sitting there and we just danced and sang, and it was an amazing time. It was beautiful, right? Just having a bunch of people singing and dancing and being in front of like that level of opposition while just having a good time. That brings me that memory brings me a lot of hope.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that, the kids are all right. Like, if we're going to like memes and being an old person, I'm only 28, but like of being like, oh, you see what high schoolers are doing and how they're organizing and standing up for rights. You see, what they're saying online, and there's a lot of hope right there. There's a lot of being like, oh, there's people who do care and there's people who stand up, and this might be a dark time, but there's been dark times in the past as well, and we've gotten through it. Trans people have always existed. We will continue to exist, and those are the things that I cling to right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of those things where like if you don't try to find the small joys, it gets harder to just show up and do the work. So you got to find ways to do that. To go, on a less personal level, though, are there any particular trends you're seeing in politics or anything where people are pushing back against the anti-trans legislation that you're like, well, this is actually pretty good over here, or anything along those lines?
That's a great question. I mean, it's very much party lines right now. We're seeing that becoming a little less the case and more of the not so great way, as in we have a few Democrats starting to cave here and there. But I think we're seeing a lot more trans people also running for office and getting involved in politics, which I think is really amazing to see, right? And a lot of it has come because of people like Representative Zoe Zephyr, who stood up for trans kids last year in Montana and was censured for it in the legislator. I know that people were inspired based off of that. So like these acts of defiance or bravery really has inspired more people to come up, and that's kind of what I am seeing right now. I think that we're at the point that the states have done a lot of their worst anti-trans laws. Don't get me wrong, there's still plenty more out there and different things they can do. But as far as blue states have also done and tried to counteract them, and there's this kind of push and pull games that you still see happen. And so yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents in what I'm observing right now, is that most of it is the hope from people just continuing to exist and push back in little ways. Like, you don't have to push back much, but like even just protesting or commenting online, sharing things online, spreading information, I think is important. You have to be careful what you do with social media, especially right now. But I think it's important to make sure that people are talking about these issues and gaining understanding for them.
You mentioned that there's more trans folks running for office than there had been in the past. Is that something that you see as an opportunity for youth involvement, participating in campaigns, helping volunteer, that sort of thing?
I mean, I know one of my friends, Emma Curtis, she just got elected to Lexington, Kentucky City Council. And I'm pretty sure she had some people who she had worked with previously when they were teenagers who worked with her campaigning and stuff. So I think it's definitely a way to get involved if you're interested in the political space, right? If you're not interested in that political space, or you don't want to be in situations where you have to talk to people face to face a lot, maybe that's not the right place for you. But if that is what you're interested in, then by all means, getting involved and learning what it's like to run for office, to eventually run for office yourself, I think is really cool and would be a great way to get involved.
I'm going to say, if somebody, you got sworn in or whatever to some sort of high office, and they, are at the gala afterwards, giving a little speech, and they're like, I really got to credit HermitCraft for getting me this far. I'd take that win. So yeah, y'all go.
You never know.
Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah, seriously. Like, I mean, I will say though, like a lot of people they never think of something until all of a sudden somebody's like, well, why don't you do this? It's like, I don't know. I just don't. What? Wait, why don't I do that? If your city council sucks, go help. And maybe there's opportunities for your city to be better because you're more involved, Like our current mayor here in Nashville, he was an IT guy, or like maybe not IT, but he worked in tech for a hospital chain here in the city. And his local city councilor wasn't very great. And he was always on, Twitter and stuff complaining about the guy. He decides, you know what, I'm just going to run against him. And he won. And then he kept winning and he became the mayor. Like, it's just being a guy who cares about what's going on around you and, participating in the process at whatever level makes sense at the time. That might not have a ceiling. You don't know where that's going to take you. That's the scary thing about helping, is you don't know where it's going to take you, but these things could happen. So, yeah, if you know someone who's running locally that you want to help, seriously consider helping them. And if you think that you could do a better job than your local city government, seriously, this is where this stuff starts. Give it a try. You might be able to do more than you could think. So...
Absolutely. And like you don't have to run on like civil rights and queer issues. You can run off of this road is a disaster and it needs to be fixed. And, a lot of times doing those things to help with your community, especially when you're trans or you're queer, especially because of how things are politicized right now, it really makes it so people get to know you for caring about something that affects everyone, and then they get to know you. And I think it's a really powerful thing when our stories and little clips of us are all over the news, and all of these made up accusations are all over the place. People getting to know someone in their community who's just like them for the most part, right? Can be really powerful.
Absolutely. It's, show up and do what you can. And like, if people, we've talked about like dehumanizing systems and how, we really need to do our best to be kind to the people around us who might be experiencing marginalization. But for the people who are currently on the other side of that, the people who are falling into these traps of believing that other people are less than them, you know what? Not everybody is beyond reaching. Sometimes if you show up and you do a good job about something they care about, that's going to challenge their belief system more than a political argument would. You showing up and being someone that they wouldn't expect to be good at a job and just doing that job well, that's going to challenge some things. And so you got to just kind of think about contributing in whatever way you can and doing the best you can. Let's move on to another question here. Nola says, I noticed that some states are labeled do not travel on the heat map. What is your advice for transgender people who actually live there?
Well, first of all, I am so sorry. Two, let's talk about that a little bit. That map, that isn't actually the heat map. That is the risk map. There's two maps there.
Okay.
One is a risk map, one is a heat map. The risk map is basically done by my good friend Erin, and she basically has taken all the information that we've researched and all the political information we know, and basically compiles it into her best opinion recommendations for the safety for trans people in these states. You'll notice a lot of states are dark red, and there's several do not travel. Those do not travel are typically there and reserved for the most what we consider an extreme anti-LGBTQ bill. So those are something such as a bill banning trans people from a bathroom matching their gender identity. That we considered, if you can avoid it, don't travel there, right? Because you're technically, if you go to the bathroom in some of these states, in specific scenarios, again, law gets kind of confusing like that, where it depends. But in most scenarios, we think it is probably illegal for you to use a bathroom matching your gender. So we say you probably shouldn't travel there. If you do live there, I would keep up with the knowledge of what's your local laws. I would make sure to have an attorney. If you don't have an attorney, maybe have the ACLU's number if you get arrested for something like this. The ACLU isn't really a hotline for these kind of things, but they do help represent people against unjust laws and civil rights.
Joju997 sent in the question, burnout is a serious problem for people when hit with this much legislative danger. How do you productively care in the face of so much to deal with?
Ooh, it's so hard. I've struggled with burnout plenty in this, and have burnout multiple times. You'll see I have gone dark both years. After 1 year is like once we hit like April, I didn't say much until back in like November or December of that year, and then I came back. Last year was a little longer, it was more May, June, and then I disappeared until about October, November, December, and I've been back at it since then. You have to pace yourself a lot. It takes some self-control, which I am not very good at. I think what's been most important for me of lately is I have a great community of people. As in, I have amazing supportive partners. I have amazing supportive kids. I know not everyone's fortunate to have those things. But it is something that does help me, and is part of the reason why I feel inspired to do this work, is I do have those things going for me that other people don't necessarily have. So I am in a good place to be able to do this work. And then also I work with many, 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 many other activists, lawyers, people from many orgs. I've seen multiple orgs mentioned tonight and heard it mentioned. Like there is a lot of people I work with all over the place. And so that really helps me. And I'm a highly anxious person. And so having information really helps me. I like being able to risk assess. And so being on top of things a lot of times help me, because either I'm doing things actively about these things, right? I am not doom scrolling Twitter. I am writing my Twitter post about it. I am talking with other people about this, what's going on. I make that post, tuck that bill away, move on to the next thing. Will it come back a bunch of times? Yes. Legislation for me is really fun. It's a logic puzzle, right? We talked about this a little bit earlier with it being similar to programming. It is a logic puzzle for me. Now, it does get really difficult though when I speak to the people who these laws are going to affect. That is when it kind of sets in and you go, oh, this really sucks. This doesn't feel good. But a lot of mindfulness, watching for listening to my own body of when I need to take breaks, going for a run here and there, or working out, making sure I'm getting enough sleep. Like there's a lot of like little things like that make a lot of difference, and making sure I'm talking to people about it. And I think that is something that has been challenging when you have people who don't want to talk about it all the time, but it's always on your mind. And so finding the right people to talk to things with is important. I have my group of activists and legislative people and lawyers I talk to. And so I'm sitting in that chat all the time talking to people about this and assessing things. That helps me cope. I don't think that helps other people, to be clear, right?
Yeah,
You
some
have to listen
people
to your
who
own
are
body.
anxious. Yeah, some people who are anxious are going to spiral if they read more stuff.
Absolutely.
I'm one of those people where I'm kind of, when I'm stressed out about something, I want to have all the information in front of me too. I want to be able to feel like I'm prepared to deal with this as much as is reasonable. And my idea of as much as is reasonable when it comes to preparedness is often called by other people by a different word. They would say, Joe, that's unreasonable. And we're going to just have to agree to disagree sometimes. But, we all have to find a way to kind of cope with different stressors in different ways. So yeah, like it's kind of a non-answer when I put it that way. So I should have just left your thing, which was a good
No,
answer.
but you're so right, though. It depends on the person, right? You have
Yeah.
to listen to your own body and what works for you. I tell people all the time, I'm not going to be offended if you block me on social media because I post about a lot of depressing, difficult conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're tired of me showing up on your feed, absolutely unfollow me and block me for your own mental health.
Yeah.
No offense taken whatsoever. Like, great, you need to protect your own mental health. For me, doing this work has been a way to cope with it.
That's totally fair. Yeah, I feel like it's hard to balance doing as much as you can and not overdoing as much as you can.
Mhm.
And
And the other
so
thing,
you mentioned taking breaks earlier, like going dark and whatever. I've found that taking breaks, like even though I don't ever fully go dark because the nature of my work, you know, taking time to disconnect or to limit the amount of time I'm spending transmitting does help me kind of refocus and recenter where I'm going to approach things from next. Taking a breather and then reassessing and reattacking, I think, is valuable.
yeah, I also try to keep things to look forward to, trips coming up, friends I'm going to visit soon, stuff like that, friends that are coming to visit, events coming up. Those kind of things also help.
Queen Dark Lady sent in the question, what is the best way to communicate to a political representative that you want them to support or not support a specific bill? That's a great
So cool.
question. Oh, sorry.
I didn't know. I was literally going to say, well, that's a great question.
It is, because, I know that
is.
the reason that I was excited about that question, I've been thinking about that a lot lately, because, letter writing as a tool for political change was a big thing for a long time, but I kind of get the sense nowadays that it doesn't matter as much as it used to. So I'm curious to hear if you've got your ear to the ground on that. What is the best way to reach a politician about supporting or not supporting a bill?
So I think it's different for every politician because they set up their offices a little bit different. But from what I've been told, especially people working on the state level, right? So you're talking about your state representatives that represent you in your state houses, so your state legislature, the people coming up with the laws for your state. Sorry, I wanted to say that a bunch of different ways to make sure people understood what I was talking about because government's weird in America. But those people, a lot of times, sending them an email or giving their office a phone call is a really good way. And same thing with federal Congress. And I do know a lot of times the people working in those offices might not take down your message exactly, but they'll keep a tally going, oh, we've gotten so many calls to support this, so many calls to that. And then to go to the elected official and be like, hey, just so you know, we had 14 calls about this issue. People wanted you to vote this way. Is it going to affect them? Who's to say? But I still I get asked this a lot too, and so now I'm inserting my own question into it that I want to kind of answer here. Of people ask, oh, is it effective? Is it worth the time to contact them? Does it actually change anything? And I'm going to give the answer we keep giving, which is it depends, but I still believe that it's important to do. That whether your phone call pushes them one way or the other, it may or may not happen, but it does start to give offices an idea of where people stand on issues. And I think that's really important. I think one phone call isn't going to change anything, but you and your friends and your community making that phone call absolutely will change things. So that's the complicated answer to that. And sometimes they have a contact form. Honestly, any way they say to contact them on their website, I would do it that way because they probably have a system in place to help you and to help them get that information.
And especially at the local level, it's probably wise to get to know as many of the candidates and whatnot while they're running for office as possible.
Absolutely.
Because if you know who's in their office, who are their staffers because you met them and now you're following each other on Twitter or not anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But like things like that, like having somebody that you know in there, so you can just hit them up on Twitter and be like, what the heck is your guy thinking? He's going to vote for this? Like, probably also do it through the proper channels. But a lot of those folks who are working in those offices, they might one day run themselves, or they might end up managing somebody else, and just making sure that the only people they hear from aren't people that 100% agree with their candidate all the time is going to be healthy for society on the whole. Sometimes the work we do has slow payoff. Yeah, sorry.
Those staffers have way more control than you think they do. And they are, in my opinion, in politics, I would rather have the contact information of a staffer than a contact information of the elected official themselves. I think staffers getting close to them, getting to know them, right? Becoming friends with them. So then you can be like you said, be like, why is he voting this way? This doesn't make sense, right? Like this isn't good. And then it might be something that they're like, oh, well, we didn't realize that. So this is what we were going based off of. And you can just have a conversation, right? And be like, oh, well, it harms people this way. Oh my God, I didn't realize that. And being able to kind of educate them on things. And also, from my experience, despite them really they should know what their bill says and does, you would be surprised the number of people who voted for bills. And then I've been like, excuse me, why did you vote for this bill? They'd just be like, oh, I just voted for it because no one told me I shouldn't. And like, I've had that happen before. Or, well, this wasn't on the list that this organization gave me. And it's like, well, I'm sorry, but like you should have read it.
You should make decisions about the things you're voting on yourself, not just depend on organizations handing you lists.
Yes, that happens more times than not. And that also puts a lot of pressure on me and others who track the stuff, as in,
if you don't track it right, it's not going to end up on the list.
There's a high chance it passes.
Yeah.
Like there's genuinely, like every year there's one or two bills that sneak by and passes and we don't know until it passes and we're like, oh my gosh. And like there's a little bit of guilt there, and also just a little bit of like responsibility of tracking this is pretty high. Just because we know getting that information out there is really important and people rely on it. Way more than they should, they should do their own research, but
not everybody has the experience that you have to make a web scraper. And
also true.
So we have an international audience here at HermitCraft, and Spare Sock wanted to know, do you know, Allison, anything about similar legislative trackers for the EU or other nations?
And these anti-trans bills and things are definitely global, especially in the UK, and even some of the other European countries. I don't know of another one like this for those countries. This is where there's been attempts and thoughts about expanding some of our different things and to include international. It's really hard though because we don't have the same level of experience and knowledge with those systems, and there's a limited amount of information. Like we deal with a massive amount of information every day, and so we just don't have the bandwidth to do that. I know for like Aaron's risk map, there is someone who does a risk map for Canada provinces now, which is good. I follow them, her, I don't know pronouns, and I don't remember who it is. So I couldn't tell you who it is, but I know I've seen it and it's good. So that's where you kind of have to look around. I'm not positive about one in the EU, though.
You know, it's not your job to be able to help everyone everywhere at once. But the magic of open source software, I'm over here looking at github.com/alleyrain/legialerts/blob/main/license, all caps. And I see that this is an Apache licensed piece of software. So if any of those HermitCraft viewers out there in any of those countries want to take a look at the code that you wrote, they might be able to find ways to incorporate what's going on in their legislature into similar hosted instances.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. Now, we leverage a Legiscan, which is a tool built for the US, but you can definitely get some inspiration from how it works and see if there's another API you can plug into that will give you similar data.
And if there's not an API for your local parliament or whatever, there's an opportunity for you to write one.
Absolutely.
So, we're going to wrap up soon, but one final technical question from Asteri the GIF Wizard. How do you ensure that the automation of your processes is trustworthy in relaying the information from the bills?
That's fantastic. Oh, I love that question. We have lots of eyes on the tracker. I think that is the true answer. There's no good automated testing of build. There is code. I can't say that it's amazing code. So a lot of it relies on people who we're interacting with that sheet. We can see when it goes wrong, and I get messages as soon as it stops working. I get messages, and I do have some logging built in at this point, so I get email alerts when log messages get thrown and stuff like that. So otherwise, it's just watching it. And the nice thing with Google Sheets is you can look back at the history and see when the bot ran and what the bot changed and stuff like that. So that can just be helpful for debugging it. But it's a great question. It's a users scream at me when it's wrong.
And
it's a scream test.
Is another way that folks can help. Many eyes make bugs shallow, Y'all can,
Very true.
Y'all can find ways to contribute just by going, that doesn't look right.
You can be like one of the people who got involved with a project who was like, Allie, here's another typo. And then I was finally like, you know what? You should come join us because I'm tired of fixing my own typos.
Yeah. You know what this sounds like is a job for you to do.
And she is the most amazing person. If you look back at our archival data, we have data going all the way back to 2009 now.
Wow.
Because she spent the time to go through and do this work, but for every year previously. So we can actually look at the changes in the rate of bills over time and the types of bills that get introduced over time. It's really fascinating.
There's so many little ways that folks can help. The only way to find what's right for you, though, is to reach out and get involved. I hope you have the opportunity to do that, everyone out there listening. So thank you so much again to Allie for joining us for this episode of HermitCraft. Let's go ahead and do a quick flyover of this build. We have got the AstroTurf in, we've got some carpet, we've got the 2 vertical transportation shafts, as well as the first floor walkway all around the perimeter of the building. Started working on the walkway down the center on the sides of the atrium. This is a lot of progress for a few hours, so thank you, Allie, for taking time out of your day to join us here on HermitCraft.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun.
There's always more work to do, but I'm inspired to. Thanks to Allison Chapman for this interview. This was my first time really trying to do a serious guest on the HermitCraft show. I hope y'all enjoyed it. Please leave your comments and your feedback in the YouTube comment section below. I will read every comment. This is deeply important to me to get stuff like this right, and I know there's a lot of room for improvement on this. Every time I do it, though, I'm hoping to get a little bit better. Thank you to Allison for giving me a shot, even though this was my first real attempt at this. All right, you may have noticed that this episode was pre-roll ad-free. That's thanks to Mr. Lance. Thanks, Mr. Lance. This episode was also mid-roll ad-free. thanks to Paige Marinchuk. Now, in lieu of that mid-roll ad, I will present a haiku of my own devising. There's much work to do, so ask around your area where you can help out. Until next time, y'all, this is Joe Hills from Nashville, Tennessee. Keep adventuring.